So good morning. My name is Nicola Barrett, and I am the Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at Goiswater Business School. Thank you for joining us today for our Business Over Breakfast webinar series. During the month of September, our webinars focused on skills for a COVID world. Last week, we explored self-awareness and emotional intelligence during stressful times, and today we are pivoting a little bit to focus on how to experiment your way to innovative growth. COVID-19 has been a wake-up call in many ways, with leaders trying to figure out the next normal, and it has really stressed the importance of being adaptable, adapting products, business models, processes, and the like. Needless to say, there's a lot of experimenting going on, and my team knows that more than ever. We're trying to get new things done to get better solutions in place. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it is that a culture of ongoing experimentation and adaptation is crucial to remain relevant. Our faculty guide today will explore experimenting and innovation, including different types of experiments we can run to make us and our organizations more innovative. I'm very pleased to have Scott Sanchez, affiliate faculty for Goiswater Business School, leading today's session. Scott is a human-driven product innovation leader with expertise in innovation, product management and design, and a history of turning deep human insights into simple yet impactful products and experiences that delight customers. He's brought a customer-driven approach to innovation to organizations of all sizes across many industries to help them invent and reinvent products and experiences to create sustainable growth and unleashing innovators along the way. Scott brings his expertise to Emory Executive Education courses like Design Thinking, which is coming up in spring 2021, as well as an innovation workshop series that we're also launching in early 2021. I can't believe I'm talking about 2021 already. Scott is going to spend about the next 35 or so minutes exploring innovation and experimentation. You're going to be asked to participate through some Menti polls and also to please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We will ask Scott to answer a few of those along the way, and then there's plenty of time at the end for our team to pose those questions to Scott. At the end of today's session, there's going to be a very short 5-question survey that I would really appreciate you filling in. Now, all you need to do is enjoy the morning with Scott, and I look forward to continuing the conversation in October, where we're going to have a new theme, which I think is very relevant to the season, around embracing change in the next normal. Hope you find today's session insightful and enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. I'm thrilled to be here today and talking to you about what we're doing. One of the things I've been fascinated by over my years of both doing innovation and teaching innovation is how do you best learn and how do you actually best apply it? Because the goal of, quote, teaching innovation is not just to teach it, it's not just to get a certificate, it's actually to use it in your day-to-day life. So excited to explore that with you all today. All right. So that's what we're going to really focus on, is how do you grow more innovative using experiments. We'll talk about that. As Nicola said, a couple tools we're going to use today. Zoom, without a doubt, you can hear me, you can see my video. I will go through some slides. We're going to use the Zoom chat function for reflections or thoughts, or even responding to questions I ask. That's a good place to do that. We're going to use the Zoom Q&A for questions you want to ask me. And then when we get into the discussion, we'll sort of open up the phone lines a little bit, maybe have a little bit of verbal discussion as well. We're also going to use Menti. Menti is a really great way to interact with people. And so we've got a series of questions, and you can look in the Zoom chat where it has the instructions. Go to menti.com and enter the code that's there, and you'll participate on as we go through this. And so this is the code. Enter this code, go to menti.com. You can do it on your phone, you can do it on your browser, etc. And the questions will follow our discussion as we go through this. All right, so we're gonna start with the first one, which is, what's your level of expertise on innovation? And I'd ask you to go to Menti now, enter that code now, and just fill in what you think. Where are you? Are you high and you're an expert? That's awesome. Are you medium? Right? There's still some more to learn. Are you low? Are you none? Or are you actually not even sure? Like, what is this innovation thing that everybody keeps talking about? So as you guys are filling that out, that's great. I just thought I would start with, one of the things I've been fascinated with throughout my career is how do you not just build innovations, but how do you actually build innovators? What does that look like? How do you make sure that you can build those skills and bring those skills? I will tell you, I've actually found that I get more scale and more success if I actually focus on the innovator side of things. Well, that's all well and good. And you've heard many companies say that, hey, people are our greatest assets. But how many companies are really investing heavily to build that up? How many of you are really investing that in yourself and making sure you're continuing to stay fresh and current? So this is great. So if I look at the poll, right, a lot of people in the low and the medium. We've got a few experts. Maybe you can give the rest of the talk, which will be awesome. And then some people unsure as well. And the reality is we actually see the spectrum pretty commonly across other things, which is there's always more to learn without a doubt. Some people are earlier, some people are later, but that's okay. That's what we want for innovation. Great participation. We're going to keep it going. Okay, so that's the first question we've got, right? So the second question is this. What if you were to articulate 2 or 3 keywords or one keyword for innovation, what would some of those words be? And we're going to have this word cloud build for us, and let's sort of see where we're starting from. One of the things I think about a lot is how do you define innovation, right? It's one of those crazy words that means so many things, right? And if you go around and ask a very simple question of what do you mean by innovation, you'll get all kinds of different answers. Awesome, I love seeing this pop. Right? So I see fresh, I see disruption, out of the box, creativity, technology, emerge, multidimensional. I love that, right? Innovation isn't just one thing. That's awesome. Really cool stuff. New, I see new popping a lot. Very cool. Keep going, that's awesome. And we'll keep looking at this. And when I think about innovation, I do think about creativity, I do think about forward thinking, I do think about disruption. But what really is innovation? I would go around as I've been working at companies and ask that simple question. And what I've found over time is people have their own definition. The problem is if it's not explicit, how do you really know what it is, right? And I think that's a really important thing for us to think about. By the way, I see experimentation popping as well. Really great job, y'all. So great, so awesome. So we now have a foundation. It's new, it's creative, it's fresh, it's different. There's technology, there's improvement, there's future. Really great stuff. So the way I think about it is this. We know that innovation is critical. We know that's a fundamental part of what we're trying to do. It's actually really hard though, right? If you think about the number of companies that have been innovative, right, have created amazing innovations, they're only a handful and they've only done it a couple times, right? It's a really hard thing to do. And there are a lot of different ways to do innovation. You can be technology driven like Google. You can be design driven like Apple. You can be a fast follower like Microsoft. Right? What's going to be your way to be innovative? I happen to have the chance to work with a man by the name of Scott Cook who founded Intuit, and I loved his definition, right? Innovation is giving people things they could never imagine and then could never imagine going back. And what I love about that is it basically says solve problems for people. Okay, so if that's our grounding for what innovation is, I think the question we have to ask ourselves is how do we grow innovation in ourselves? How do we grow more innovative? And I would postulate to you that I would argue big change in ourselves comes from small experiments. Now I'll tell you, this can be a little counterintuitive. You go to a course, you take a class, et cetera, and you want to come back and apply all of it. And that's great. What I've actually found though, is that people who are most successful in applying innovation in the days and weeks after an innovation talk or an innovation course is they actually try small things. And so that's what I would ask you to think about is how can you actually try small things instead of go big, go small as you think about bringing innovation into your job. The reality is we've all been successful for the most part by doing what we do, by being good at things, by having skills, by building those skills, and by applying those skills. Innovation comes along and it can't change everything we're about. In fact, in many ways, innovation has to come in and help supplement, help be part of who we are, and help us take it forward. So think about what are small experiments you can do to actually bring more innovation to your job. But before we get into the experiments, let's really ground ourselves. And those of you who know me know I love to tell stories. So let me tell you a story. And this is a story from First Data. I saw some of my First Data colleagues, so some of this may resonate for some folks. But let me tell you a story about when I was at First Data, and we were asked to create an app for Money Network users. We ran an innovation team. We partnered closely with the business to do that. Now, if you're not familiar with Money Network is basically a payroll card or a salary card. You get your paycheck every month deposited onto this instead of in a bank account, because this program is more for the, what is in the industry calls them the underserved or the underbanked. By the way, those people don't think of themselves that way, but you get the idea. And so this is a really good program. It's a prepaid debit card that you can use, and you get your salary on there, and then you can use it just like a credit card. It's not a credit card, but it's a prepaid debit card. So we had to create an app. Everybody seems to want an app, right? You know how that goes. So we said, okay, great. And the business told us, what we really want you to do is create an app for Money Network users so that they don't call us as much, which will save us money and we can spend our money doing other things, right? It's a very business need, but that was really the original problem statement, right? Now, in this customer-driven approach to innovation that we do, not a surprise, we really focused on the Money Network user. So we went out in the field and talked to her and him. We gained empathy. We went there. This is actually a picture of us in an apartment somewhere. So let me tell you about Erica. Erica's a real person, but she also represents the type of persona we were going after. Doesn't trust banks. In fact, she was with a big bank at one point, and she had a low balance fee, and they charged her for that, $25 or something like that, and she didn't buy groceries that month, or that week, sorry. And so think about these people. It's amazing how close to zero they live, right? Lower socioeconomic, more hourly stuff, not the best places to live. Erica lives about 15 minutes north of downtown Atlanta, or did when we talked to her. Erica also has a live-in boyfriend, Lester. You see the new baby as well. I think the baby was 6 or 9 weeks old when we visited. Lester's not the father, but lives there. Erica told us a story one time where she let Lester borrow the Money Network card. He was only supposed to spend $10 on it. He spent $25 on it, and they didn't buy groceries that week. Life is really hard for people like Erica, and they count every penny. So as we started to understand Erica a little bit more, what we saw is that she calls the 1-800 Money Network number, right? And we knew the top phone calls, right? And then she would, sometimes it's automated, sometimes it's you talk to a person. The top phone calls were things like, what's my balance? Has that check cleared? Or is that deposit, deposit cleared? Or has that transaction gone through? Things like that. So we had an idea of what this app could become. But as we went with her and followed her to other places she went, she shops at places like this. And I got to tell you, her math skills are amazing. What was amazing as she was shopping is she would actually do the math in her head of everything she put in her cart. And she literally would count up, okay, that's $3 and about 60 cents. That's $5 and about 70 cents. And she does this largely because the worst thing that could happen is she gets to the checkout counter and she gets declined. She loves this Money Network card. She loves it. It looks like a Visa card. It looks like she's part of the financial mainstream like everyone else. It's not. It's a debit card, so there's a defined balance and you can't go over. And so the worst thing that could happen is she gets up to the counter and she gets declined. And we even saw her say, God, that's $3 or $4 over. I can't put that in. So understanding how much money she really has in her account and then calculating how much she's going to use is really important to Erica. So we said, okay, great. We came back as a team. We synthesized our findings. We got our insights together and we said, gosh, what have we learned? What are we thinking about there, right? And you see sort of a highly collaborative team working together to figure that out. So we said, okay, well, what if the problem is helping her quickly know how much money she has? Seemed a reasonable problem. It seemed to resonate really well for Erica. And we brainstormed of how to do that, right? Brainstormed lots of ideas. Yes, we used lots of Post-it notes, right? We created some prototypes, if you will. These are hand-drawn sketches, right, to bring to life the idea. And we created an early prototype that looks about like this, right? You can see up at the top, the balance really high, $1,000, right? You can see her latest activity. So she knows what's actually going to hit or what's already hit and even knows what hasn't hit yet. So she can do the math on the calculation, et cetera. And we went and took these prototypes out and actually tested them even more with people like Erica. And we got feedback on that. And they said things they liked, they said things they didn't like, right? And they gave us lots of feedback. And we started to realize that this quickly know how much money you have was really important. As we kept going, though, in this project, we started to learn there was something else that really resonated. Erica really likes to save money, right? And when we think about saving money, we often, the masses, we often think about saving for a home, saving for a car, saving for retirement. And it was interesting as we started to talk about those types of things, that didn't resonate at all with people like Erica. The way Erica saves is she saves this way. She creates envelopes of different things. She literally puts cash oftentimes into her envelopes so she can make sure that she has the money. Said another way, saving for her is not a long-term thing. It's a short-term thing. We even met someone who said, I try to save for a rainy day, but it rains a lot. Challenging times. So we said, well, gosh, originally one of our ideas was, let's create a savings account, right? Let's give her, a way to save for a home and whatnot. If we would have done that, we would have learned that that wouldn't have resonated really well at all for someone like Erica, right? She needs that money soon. We had one guy tell us, I'm saving for tires. I need new tires for my car and I need to save up for those tires. And I hope to have the money by November 1st. So how do we create a solution that actually helps save in the short term and help save for those rainy days? In many ways, we were inspired by the story of these envelopes. And so what we ended up creating was a second problem, right? In addition to the quickly know how much money they have, they also need to set aside money for this rainy day. By the way, the words they used as we talked to them were set aside, right? So great, let's just call it set aside, right? As we think about it. As we did more iteration, more prototyping, et cetera, right? We kept iterating the solution, we kept iterating what we were thinking. Long story short, we created this piggy bank. A piggy bank is, you get the idea, right? It's a call back to when we were younger and ideally had a piggy bank. So in Money Network, you can create 3 piggy banks, right? You can name them. You can name them rainy day. You can name them my kids' clothes. You can name them whatever you want. You can move money into the piggy bank and move money out of the piggy bank quite easily, right? Because remember, it rains a lot. And so we need to make this money available. And the traditional model of saving, right? You put money away and you never touch it. Well, people like Erica can't live like that, right? And so how do we give them a way to save for their short-term things, right? And that was a big thing of what we were trying to create, is allow them to do this piggy bank to understand things. And they loved it. They loved naming it things. They love those shorter term goals. They loved the ability that they had the money. It was sort of protected away from their main balance, but if they really needed it, they could move it back really quickly, almost with the swipe of a finger. We kept iterating. Long story short, we created an app, a couple of versions of it, right, that supplemented the Money Network experience. And what I'm thrilled to say is it made a difference, right? At the end of the day, innovation is not just about something cool or an idea or a good story. It made a difference. These are just some stats that I pulled that I thought were interesting. In the first few months after the launch of V1, we had a 64 Net Promoter Score. And if you're familiar with Net Promoter at all, this is the would you recommend to a friend or colleague, right? 64 is world-class, right? This really solved a problem really well, and they told their friends about it. That was awesome. And then honestly, what I'm even more proud of when we launched Piggy Bank, in the first 5 weeks after Piggy Bank launched, people saved over $4.3 million, about 40,000 people, as I recall, about $100 each. And we had this amazing quote that you can see here, right? In 40 years of working, I've never been able to save, but now I have 2 piggy banks. It makes me proud to finally save money. Those are the types of things that we're trying to create. We had this other woman who came to us and said, after every Christmas, I'm always in the hole. This is the first January where I don't start out the year in a hole. So when we think about giving people things they could never imagine and then could never imagine going back, that's what we really want to try to create in innovation. So lots of different ways to do innovation, but I'd call your attention to sort of the way I think about it, right? I really believe a customer-driven approach to innovation is the most repeatable model. Yet there's technology-driven. Google sunsets more products than most companies ever launch. There's Microsoft, they follow what everyone else does. All of those work fine. For me, that most repeatable approach is this customer-driven approach, also known as design thinking. And all it really means is to identify and address a need or solve a problem, right? Through collaboration, through using empathy to uncover needs, sometimes that are expressed, sometimes that are not expressed, and to use prototyping to bring to your life the idea before you actually build it, right? So regardless of what model methodology of innovation you subscribe to, for me, these building blocks are critical, right? You work together on a small team, collaboration. You understand people sometimes better than they know themselves. By the way, the need you often start out solving is often not the need you end up solving. And that's an important realization and a pivot to make. And then you create prototypes before you actually make them. So that's one of the ways I think about design thinking and thinking about innovation and whatnot. And those are really, those three pillars are going to form the foundation for what we're going to talk about over the next few minutes. All right, so let's do one more, let's do another poll. What's an area of natural strength for you, right? If you were to think about it, you can only pick one. What's an area of natural strength? Is it the collaboration? Is it using empathy to find needs? Is it prototyping? Or are you pretty much good at all of these? And again, you can give the rest of the talk. Awesome. So we're starting to see some of the data come in, right? So a good amount of collaboration, a lot of empathy, really interesting. I will tell you, when a lot of people think about empathy, a lot of people think of it as you just ask people what they want. You've probably heard, people can't really tell you what they want, right? Thank you, Linda, on the Zoom chat. Empathy, awesome. I'm watching Zoom chat too. So thank you for that, Linda. So, you know, interesting. So empathy is big here, right? Really interesting. Collaboration. We theoretically have been doing collaboration for years as well. Not as much on creative prototyping, and then 6% of you are going to become affiliate faculty members and replace me, which is awesome too. Interesting. So that's sort of where we are and where we think our natural strengths are. Awesome. All right, let's keep going. So again, going back to the premise of this, if big change comes from small experiments, right? That's what I want you to think about. How do you go small around collaboration? How do you think about empathy? How do you think about creative prototyping, right? Here's what I would also ask you to think about, right? Is, okay, so if these are the pieces, what are some small experiments we want to run? You saw some of what our team did around collaboration, but let's go into collaboration a little bit. One, you could use one of these collaborative behaviors that you heard about or know about it and bring it back to your own team. Is it sharing leadership and iterating leadership? Right? And what that basically means, think of it as a baton, right? That actually, you know, at any one time, someone is leading the meeting and then you rotate to someone else. That's a behavior that we've seen. Is it moving fast? The team is able to move fast. We were able to create prototypes in hours, right? We were able to develop the problem statement in hours. In the real world, how long does it take to do that, right? We've often seen that, you know, design thinkers and innovators move in minutes and seconds, not days and weeks, right? How do you think about that? Is it time box? For example, when we do our brainstorm, all right, we only have 10 minutes to come up with 100 ideas, go, right? Is it time boxing those things, right? That can be a way to do it. Is it actively listening? As you can imagine, to try to figure out what we were doing to solve a problem, we had to listen very closely to each other. Is it building on each other's ideas? The proverbial yes and, you've probably heard that, right? Is it leveraging space, whether it's physical space like you see here, or digital space? We're using tools like Mural or Miro, which are basically online whiteboards, right? Is it using one of those? Is it creating a culture of feedback? So these are different behaviors you could bring into a collaboration experience that you could run. Again, I'd encourage you to pick one, not all. Pick one that you think might actually make a difference. So that's one. Now, of course, in collaboration in today's world, right, we're all sitting on Zoom. How do you attack that, right? Some of the behaviors we see to make it more deliberate. What we're finding is that as much as Zoom can help in some ways, we're losing the human a little bit in all of us. So we actually have to be even more deliberate. So can you do more check-ins with your team and ask the question, how are you feeling really? Don't accept the 7th grade boy's answer that says fine. Just tell me really, tell me what you're thinking about. Is it that? We're also seeing the blurring of work and life. Can you separate that out more? Right? Can you be deliberate? Hey, we're going to end this meeting at 4:59 so you can get on to your family. Is it more posture switching? We're finding that people are sitting in front of their Zoom, looking into a camera like I'm doing right now for hours and hours. Is it being deliberate and saying, all right, everybody turn off your camera, go for a wander walk and wonder about how we could solve this problem? Is it about, hey, go on a walk and switch to a phone call instead of a video? right? How do you create more posture switching? How do you use these windows into people's lives that we're seeing, right? One of the good introductions I like to do now is pick something off of your desk and show it, right? And tell us about yourself a little bit more, right? Or what we're also finding is that people have less of their game face on now. How can you actually take advantage of that? I made a comment earlier this year about how can we keep our proverbial sweatpants on when we go back to the office and actually start working again, right? And physically. So how do you really take advantage of less of the game face? I think people's guards are down a little bit. There's something pure about, from an innovation perspective, to take advantage of that. So there's a handful of different behaviors you could try on and take an experiment back to your work. All right, that's collaboration. Empathetic need finding, let's talk about what that is. And many of you said, I'm pretty good at empathetic need finding. Great, right? How do you engage a customer through empathy, right? How might you ask an open-ended question of someone and then listen to understand, not to solve? This is really hard for people. I took the CEO of First Data out and we did a customer visit at a small business in New York City. And I asked him, strongly encouraged, you could say, to just listen. And he did not say a word for 45 minutes. I was thrilled. Of course, then at 45 minutes, he said, all right, Scott told me not to talk for a while. I got to jump in now, right? And what did he do? He jumped in and he listened more, but then he started to solve. I love solving, but empathy is about understanding and listening. So instead of listening to solve or listen to reply, just listen to understand. So go call up a customer, or if they're not a customer, a friend or a family member, and just ask them an open-ended question. Tell me about the last time you bought insurance. Tell me about the last time you opened a bank account. Whatever those things are, try those types of things. All right, that's empathy. Creative prototyping. This is one we were much weaker on. I think it was 10% of people felt that was an area of natural strength. Not a surprise. It's funny because we're humans and we think in solutions, right? But yet actually trying something and pulling it together quickly, right? And showing something isn't something we're naturally good at. And we find that consistently. So what I would ask you to do, a small behavior you could do, take an idea you've got, create a quick prototype of it and get feedback. Said another way, show someone what you're thinking instead of telling them. Now, a lot of questions I get here are things like, well, what if I'm not building a product, right? What if I don't have an app that I'm creating? No problem whatsoever. So let me tell you a quick story about something I did at Nationwide. I was most recently the Chief Innovation Officer there. This was a few years ago, and my boss said, this was in October, he said, by December, we want to put together an end of the year innovation report. Great. And so I was like, I had lots of ideas of what that is. Later that day, I came back to him and showed him this, right? And he, first of all, this was still October, this was later that day. And once, I showed him something hand-drawn. Once he was like, who the heck did I just hire? He actually found it really helpful to engage, right? You can see the little N and the eagle up in the upper left. Terrible drawing. I'm not a good drawer, but I can draw enough to get the point across, right? And I said, imagine, we'll get out sometime in December, right? There's an executive summary that said we made progress, yada, yada, yada. Here are the pieces that I think are included. An update on process, an update on team, an update on portfolio. And there are probably some pretty charts and graphs, right, that show something like that. This is a prototype. Not well thought through, right? Didn't know a lot of details. Didn't spend much time working on it, probably about 20 minutes, right? Just drawing it together. There might've been another page or two. And I put it in front of him and he gave me feedback. He said, I don't think you need this section. You're missing this section. I don't think you need that chart, but you're missing this. Aren't I glad I learned those things in October as opposed to December when I actually would have launched it? And that's the idea around a prototype. Put it together quickly. It's unfinished. We're so used to the idea of we put something together and we make it perfect and we turn it in and we're expecting an A back. I want the F. I want the F because it's all about learning, right? I want the F. By the way, you've probably heard this, fail. The words fail, you can also reframe first attempt in learning, right? I want the learning. So a prototype of a deck, a prototype of a report, a prototype of a program with Post-it notes and the contents and the topics. That's what we mean by prototype. And I will tell you, using prototype will help you learn big things fast because one, it's cheap and fast. Here, you see it. But secondly, people really want to help you when they see something like this. They feel a little sorry for you and they want to help you. And that's what we want, is we want that feedback really early. All right, so that's prototyping. So what small experiments are you going to try in your day job? All right, we're going to do one more question here, right? Which is, all right, so now that we've talked about collaboration, empathy, and creative prototyping, what are the areas of biggest stretch for you? What are the areas where you could learn more? Awesome. I love the data coming in. By the way, if you put none, feel free to. I'm actually going to pivot over to you, and you're going to actually give it, you're going to finish the talk for me. Awesome. Not a surprise in some sense, the things that are the opposite of our strengths are the areas of opportunity, right? Here's what I would say. Thank you, Linda. Another creative prototyping, right? Without a doubt. Yeah, look, here's what I would say. A couple things. One, no doubt prototyping is something we can work on. I hope I've demystified it a little bit. I hope I've lowered the bar on it. I hope you feel like you could create a prototype in 5 minutes, right? Maybe later today, and I'd actually encourage you to, right? Great. But that also, I'm also a big believer, not just in attacking our weaknesses, but also in strengthening our strengths. So don't feel like you have to pick prototype just because that's an area of biggest stretch. In fact, there's part of me that would say, pick an area that's strong and make it stronger. Pick empathy, pick collaboration, because the reality is we're not nearly as good as we think we are. I know that I keep learning every time I do a project or an empathy interview or a prototype, keep learning. So think about where do I attack my weaknesses, but also where do I strengthen my strength, right? As we think about that, right? Ray asked on the Q&A, which I'll just throw in right now, how do you bring prototype back to collaboration? Great question. And should you keep it between you and decision makers? A couple things. One, you will get to a stronger answer by having a small team around you, right? And so in some sense, empathy is done through collaboration, as is prototyping. These experiments, it really comes down from which angle you want to focus on, right? That's one thought. The second thought is, when you test a prototype, ideally, it's not just you. Ideally, you've got a team member or two with you, and you put it in front of a user, right? And you get their feedback. But let me be really careful on one thing. The user is different than a stakeholder. Stakeholders, like your boss, sometimes often have very strong opinions on what you should do. They may not be the user of your product or your program or your deck or whatever it is. So be really mindful of who's your user that you get feedback from. To be clear, you want feedback from your boss. The other thing I did on that report I showed you is I got feedback from my boss. I actually prototyped it with a few people who I cared about reading it and using it so that I could make sure that when they got it, it actually met their needs. Great question, Ray. All right, so here we go. Biggest stretches around prototyping, but again, that doesn't mean those are where the experiments are that you run, but think about that. So again, big change comes from small experiments. One of the other ways I like to think about it is that small experiments are connected to small risks, right? This is not going to make or break your career. This is not going to make or break your product. It's not even going to make or break a meeting. If your experiment goes horribly wrong, oh well, right? As we think about it, right? And so don't get it perfect. Just get it done. Try it. Try a collaboration. And by the way, if any of you remember Johnny Carson, I saw some funny clips where a joke failed and he actually laughed about it. Another way to think about it, have you ever seen acrobats do trapezes, right? What happens when they land it perfectly? They raise their hands and say, ta-da. What happens when they fail miserably and fall? They stand up, they raise their hands, and they say, ta-da. It just is about learning. So try these experiments and learn from them. Okay, so 3 experiments you could run in the next days or week, right? And we'll talk about each of them a little bit and be thinking about what experiments you might run in one of these areas or all of these areas, all right? And write yourself an I will statement, right? I will, and I'll show you a couple examples in just a second. Write yourself an I will statement. Be specific, not in the I'll be more creative at work. I don't know how to check the box on that. I don't know what you're gonna do. Be much more specific, right? I will run a brainstorm and I will use yes and next week at my staff meeting, right? What you'll do when, and do it in the next week. Go small risk. So here are a couple examples, right, that you could think about. I think I already talked about the first one, right? A brainstorm that I could run and I'll use yes and to build on somebody's idea. That could be a very simple collaboration experience you could try that really builds on that one behavior of building on the ideas of others. An empathy experiment could be, hey, I'm going to talk this weekend to my cousin Kevin. Doesn't have to be a real customer, just a Kevin. Kevin's thinking about auto insurance, a new auto insurance. And maybe I work for an insurance company, right? I'm going to start with a question. Tell me about the last time you bought auto insurance. And then I'm going to probe. I'm going to ask why. I'm going to listen. I'm not going to try to solve. I'm just going to be open and listen, ask why, curate the conversation by saying, tell me more and tell me more. And I'm just going to learn deeply about things. I'll worry about what to do with it later. That's a small empathy experiment you could run in the next hours or days. A prototyping might be, right, like we've talked about, I'm going to hand sketch a rough picture of my presentation and share it with my boss and 2 of my peers to get feedback. What I really need to know is what to include. So great, I'm going to hand draw it, and it might be a little uncomfortable to hand draw it, right? When's the last time we took out a pen and drew, right? Take a picture of it and in this digital world, and you can even show it on your camera and say, here's what I'm thinking, give me feedback. And one of the tactics we love, by the way, in collecting feedback is I like and I wish, and introduce that and say, hey, give me feedback. When you give me feedback, use words like I like this or I wish that. My 5-year-old has been doing I like, I wish for school day for the last year and a half. I'm pretty sure all of us can do it as well. And we're just really trying to get feedback, and that's key. So these could be some experiments you could think about, right? And write yourself a few I will statements, right? Now, get out a piece of paper and write it down and listen as we wrap up the talk, because now we're going to start to engage in a little bit of discussion. And what I'd love for you to do is, the next Menti one is, tell us about an experiment you want to run, right? We may look at a couple of these. Keep going as we do this. I'm interested to hear a little bit more about what you're thinking as you think about different experiments you can run. I think it would be great to hear. So I'll give you just a second to think about that while I take a look at the Q&As, and I'll probably start with a couple of these as we jump into how do you actually do that. There's probably somebody on the call named Kevin, so my apologies about that. All right, let's see. I'll come back to that one. Great question. Playground, awesome. So Adelaide, I love your concept. It feels like a playground or sandbox, right? And that's what we want. We want that sandbox, right? We want to be able to make it a little bit more fun, to make it a little bit more clear. Look, this stuff should be fun, but it's all about learning. Sandboxes are amazing for learning, and they're a great place to test things as well. Adelaide, I think that's a great way to talk about it. I love playground and sandbox as metaphors. That's what you're doing. You're creating a world where this thing exists for real before it actually exists for real. And I think that's really powerful. Really, really good job. Awesome. Oh, Anonymous, innovation seems more applicable to certain industries, but more of a challenge for others. You know, here's what I would say. Thank you for that. Thank you for the question, without a doubt. I haven't actually found that to be the case. A lot of innovation does have its roots in products or technologies, right? But I actually don't think of it that way. In fact, design thinking as a concept, it used to be called design a number of years ago. They added the thinking because thinking like a designer is actually some of the skills that you want to use. Now, I actually don't like the word thinking. I prefer to think of it as design doing, right? Because it's much more about actions as you go. But what I do think about is I've seen it be applied into healthcare. I've actually seen it be applied into law. I taught a group of legal people design thinking a number of years ago. And what they learned is how they engage with clients is a big part of it. How they actually solve problems and attack things working on their small legal team is also part of it. So I would tell you, design thinking isn't for everything at all. But when there is a user that's trying to accomplish something, there is often an opportunity for something like this customer-driven innovation to actually be part of this. And then just to stay on that for a second, Adelaide had another good point about highly regulated. What about highly regulated environments, right? Here's what I would tell you. Everybody knows you've got to progress, you've got to advance, you've got to improve. I just spent a good 3 years in insurance, and you want to talk about high regulation, right? Regulation is what has kept a lot of the insurance companies in business. But what got us here won't keep us going. And I think that's the key thing. And so what you've got to do is you've got to understand the regulation, and you've got to figure out ways around. In fact, I would argue regulation or constraints can actually make you even more creative as you think about. Because if you can really understand the customer's needs, I have yet to run into a situation where a feasibility of something like regulation or technology actually got in the way. All right, let's keep going. Some really good experiments here. A customer conversation, great. A checkout calendar, I love it. I can imagine a prototype of a checkout calendar, right. Let me make sure, white box covering the answers. Oh, weird. Okay, well, we're gonna move on. Okay, cool, thank you, Sarah. Awesome, so bring market data. I wish, read your teenager's mind, awesome. By the way, create a prototype for a mind reader, show it to your teenager and see what it says, right? That could be a super interesting prototype. So awesome, really good prototypes as you think about here. So now let's keep going, right? So we're gonna keep doing a little bit more discussion for another 10 or 15 minutes as we think about that. And by the way, one of the things I want you to do is keep thinking about experiments you're gonna run, because your next Minty, just to preview that, it is going to be, are you gonna commit to 1 experiment, 2 experiments, 3 experiments, or none? And while we won't sort of surface your name to everybody, you'll sort of see where people are. So be thinking about what experiments you can run. Awesome. So let's take some other questions. Doug asked a really good question around business model innovation. You know, it's funny, what I have learned about companies, one of the ways I think about innovation is the intersection of desirability, feasibility, and viability, right? And my definition of an innovation is it really solves the intersection of all 3. Many companies, most companies I've worked with, most organizations I've worked with have a decent lens around their business or their business model and how to make money. Many of them have a decent lens on feasibility. The biggest gap has desirability. And that's why I tend to focus more on that. Usually I find that if there's a need out there that you find and you can solve it, feasibility, you can usually make money at it, right? As a shorthand for viability. However, right, you also have to be thinking about what is the business model for this? Whether it's a cost savings or a business model, absolutely something to think about. The way I think about it is this: have a lens to it early, but don't let it drive what you're doing. Right? What you really should be focused on is where are the needs? Where are the unmet needs? Where's the friction that I can unlock? And if I can solve it, then I can figure out that later. That being said, don't let it go too long, right? And so I hate to give you the answer of it depends and you got to sort of triangulate it, but that's the way. Early, think heavy desirability, where's the need, where's the opportunity, right? Later on, you can start to bring in viability in a few iterations and feasibility as well. You know, you can't go too long, you can't go too early. And I think that's the key part of business model innovation. I happen to believe that most of your sparks of insight come from the desirability, and then you can go from there. No doubt, as companies start to figure out an opportunity or an innovation to go after, doing a different business model is a challenge. But what I found is that if you can bring the stories to life, if you can bring the opportunities to life, you can actually get people there. At Nationwide, which is it goes to market largely through agents, people you call and get on the phone with or meet and get your insurance. We found an opportunity of we call them the self-reliant millennial. So someone who's 25 or 35 getting off of their parents' insurance. They don't go to agents. In fact, they don't want to go to their parents' agent. They actually want to buy direct. And so it was surprisingly more easy for us to go to market and have a different business model as we started to bring the needs to life within Nationwide than I would have thought. So that helped a lot. Thanks, Doug. Awesome. Okay, great. Let's keep looking at some of these questions. One, I think I just answered that, a business model. Again, not too late, but also not too early. Oh, public company, let me hit that one quickly. Here's the thing. When you think about public companies, you know, public companies I love, I've worked at many, right? They try to balance short and long, but they really just solve for short. But here's the thing. Innovation, you know, transformational innovation that's more long-term shouldn't be a huge percentage of your portfolio. And so what I often like to do is, as I talk to leaders, is to say, look, these set of innovations, we're going to focus on the business model in the next year. It's got to come out. We've got to make money on that. But this one, let me work through that a little bit more. And so I try to bring a portfolio approach to it. And if I can give them the shorter term things that will help them meet their numbers, then I earn the right to allow and attack some of those longer term things as well. To be clear, it's hard. And even though some things that I've tried to make longer term, I've often got the, well, how's it going to solve for me now? And so it's a continual conversation with leadership to do that, because these people are often operators, right? They often want, I put in this amount of money, I get this out. And that's sort of a very linear approach. Innovation is much more exponential, right? You get less in the short term for some of these bigger innovations, but it ends up being more exponential. So you got to just keep telling the story. You got to bring people along. I'm a big believer in what I call innovation through collaboration, which actually works and communicates and isn't a secret club somewhere. It's actually very transparent about what we do. Awesome. Let's pivot a little bit. Amy asked a great question on empathy. What are some good questions to get customers to talk about needs they don't know they have, or how to articulate? So Amy, I love the question. We're actually building up an innovation workshop we're going to launch in January that's going to go much deeper on empathy. But let me give you a couple things to think about. One is what you want to do is really focus on the past. The best predictor of future behavior is the past. So tell me about a time you last bought auto insurance, or insert your company's product or offering there. Tell me about a time. What's your best experience with buying auto insurance? What's your worst experience with buying auto insurance, right? Tell me about a time when you really struggled with this. Follow-up questions are things like, and how did that make you feel? And why was that? And why was that? So why is a great thing, right? And you want to encourage that. And you really want to understand them deeply, not just the functional things. A lot of people stay at the function surface level, but at a deeper emotional level, what's really going on. So those are some of the things we talk about when we think about empathy. Great question. Okay, let's see. Revenue. I think, Lily, we hit that a little bit. You're right. Revenue is always a #1 priority. But again, think about a portfolio approach. Think about, hey, let me work on getting you future revenue. I know this isn't going to help you right now, but I think it could help you down the road, and allow yourself to hopefully earn that right to do it. And you really need their support. But the way you need their support, so I often find, again, I have to sort of split my brain. Sometimes I help them on things, and I'll do some of that stuff. And other times I'll work on things that I think will be a big deal later. Of course, you could solve that with a separate innovation lab that reports into the CEO, right, and has a dedicated budget. Most of us don't have that. So you got to figure out how to both exist within what matters to the company and still allow yourself enough room. It's just another constraint to innovate around. Still yourself another situation where you can think about that. Awesome. Very, very good. Awesome. Let me keep looking. All right. Great. Right. All right. Here's a good one. Wandy, thank you for the question. What best practices have you seen in companies that encourage innovation at all levels? Right. So as you think about, I think about it this way. One is there's the closer in innovation, right? The best practices I've seen around innovation is they have some amount of closer in innovation. You're working with the business units, you're working with the existing products, you're trying to build capability there, you're helping them along the way, but they also have some farther out innovation projects or innovation resources, right? And in some ways you hold those two in tension. But the third thing that I found, perhaps even more importantly, that underlies each, is don't just think about building innovation, also think about building innovators. And so one of the things we tried to do at First Data, I've done it at Nationwide, is yes, we launch things and yes, we create new products and offerings, but we also invest heavily in our people to try to build up those skills. And I would tell you, it's the old adage of you can fish for someone and they eat for a day, you teach them to fish, they can eat for a year. Same thing goes with innovation. And so don't lose sight of the innovator side of it, but you can't also lose sight of the innovation side of it. So that's probably one. Another best practice is that portfolio approach. And the third that I probably like the most is getting diverse teams together. Not just the more traditional definitions of diversity and inclusion, but also things like diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of background, diversity of function. That's another best practice, because a diverse team can get to a better outcome, I find, without a doubt. Sid asked a great question. How would you apply innovation as a student? Great question. Here, I would say two things, right? One is learn as much as you can, and you can learn through these experiments. And that's probably what I want to spend the last few minutes of, is talking about experiments and innovation that we can do. but you learn. I think secondly, try things yourself. If you just have a passing thought of an idea for a business, instead of, don't think about it or put it aside till you're not a student, create a quick sketch and show it to a few people and get feedback. It may go nowhere, right? But at the same time, maybe it'll spark you to different areas. And that's one of the things that I really believe about innovation is I don't believe in the model of innovation. I call it the Eureka model, where you slip in the shower and you have this idea and 6 months later you're in stealth mode and you launch and you IPO a few weeks later, right? I just don't believe in that. It's great for some people. I love that model for some people. That's not me. I have to work a lot harder. The way I work though is I iterate. I try things, I listen, I learn. I'm probably not going to have the most original idea that changes the world. I don't have the answer, but I know how to get the answer. And so that's what I would encourage you to do is just try some of these things, right? You've got some interesting opportunities as you see so many things as a student. What could some of those businesses or ideas be? Turn them into a prototype. And again, if that goes nowhere, at least you're learning, right, along the way. To Sanjay's question about our creating idea banks a useful tool, I love ideas. I love to create ideas. But again, very seldom has I seen an idea in pure form be the right thing. So I actually think about, instead of ideas, I think about initiatives. Start with an idea, prototype it, iterate it, learn it, evolve it, combine it with other ideas, and allow yourself to go on that journey, right, as you think about recombining or some of these things along the way. Awesome. Let's talk for a few minutes about experiments over the last 4 minutes, and then we'll hand it back. Anonymous asked, how should experiments, should a company be running at one time, right? Should we focus on 1 to 2 things or whatnot? Let me give you 2 answers to that. I believe it depends, right? At the very least, I like 3 experiments, right? Or 3 projects, right? 1 closer in, 1 sort of medium term, and 1 further out. I like that spread in general as I think about it. And I think there needs to be a balance across those as well. So I at least like 3, again, though there's no magic number. We had 25, I think, running it nationwide, but that was a real innovation at scale thing. What I would focus on more as you think about experiments, especially for yourself, is not applying these experiments to projects, but applying them in a meeting or an idea or a deliverable or a work stream. So again, don't go big, go small, right? And try some of these things. Don't try to be great at collaboration, even 100% great at collaboration next week. Pick one element of the what we've talked about today of collaboration and try that. Have 1 empathy conversation. Don't have 15, right? Create 1 prototype. Don't create 100, right? And what I would encourage you to think about as you go through this, right, is really think about, actually I'm gonna, let me do this. All right, so so I'll come back to the last Minty question in just a second, because what I would really encourage you to do is run some of these experiments, learn, and then run another one. So try 1 piece of collaboration or 1 empathy interview, and then have a moment where you learn about it, what worked well, what didn't work well, et cetera, and then try another experiment a day later or an hour later. And really think about your experiments as a series of snowballs rolling down the hill. Because that's what we have. As you think about bringing this back into your own career, right? This isn't about all of a sudden I would be innovative at work. This is about how do I grow innovative over time, and that snowball can get bigger and bigger and have bigger and bigger impact along the way. And I would think about it that way. Because the reality is your journey, your innovation journey should look and feel a little like this, right? Steps left and steps right, steps forward and steps back. And so everybody wants a straight line here, but it's hard to get the straight line. And the reality is, as I've taught these courses, as I've taught people, is they can't bring everything they learn or want to apply in one fell swoop. So don't try 1 thing here and really build that energy for yourself. So we'll do the last Minty question in the last minute or so as I look for another question or so to answer, which is, as you sort of think about this, what experiments will you commit to? Will you run 1? Great. I hope you can run 1. Will you run 2? Okay. Will you run 3? That's great. A collaboration, empathy, and a prototyping, great. Or I'm not really the experimental type of person. And by the way, there's a good number of you out there who probably thought, hey, I'm really not an experimental type of person. Here's my ask. Experiment with trying to experiment. Just try it and see what happens, right? So I think that's a really good way to think about it. And then maybe I'll hit 1 more question, and then I want to hand it over as we wrap this thing up. Let me hit this one. This is a great one. What about emotionally charged topics? How do you think about this? here's the way I think about it. We were just doing a course with a company around social justice, and you can imagine what that is like in today's world. People's favorite subject to talk about is themselves. It just is. So design thinkers or innovators, let them. And so remember, this isn't a two-way dialogue. You're not necessarily sharing your point of view. In fact, you shouldn't be sharing your point of view. How did that make you feel? And what was that like? What were you thinking when, right? You are going in with the mindset of a child. You're not judging. You're with respect. You're optimistic. And what I find is that people will tell you a whole lot more, even about emotionally charged topics, than you would ever expect. We did a project at Nationwide around death, around what's it like to lose a loved one. And it's challenging, right? And we made sure our team was supported in the right ways, right? With therapists if they needed it, right? And whatnot. But we learned a lot. And I think that was a really important thing to think about. Awesome. So what experiments? Awesome. Please hold yourself accountable. We're not going to ask you to turn in homework. Try 1 or 2 or 3 of these experiments and see what happens and learn from it. And that's what we find is the way to learn. It's that snowball rolling down the hill, learning through experiments and growing more innovative. I encourage you to try and learn and keep making yourself an innovator. And hopefully Emory and I played a small part in that. Thank you a ton. Nicola, I think Nicola or Sarah, I'll hand it back to you.
Yes, thank you, Scott, so much. As we wrap up today's session, we just want to have a big thanks to you because of all the great insights you provided us. Just want to make everyone aware, of the upcoming sessions that we have. So we've been so grateful to everyone who has joined us every Thursday morning, especially for today's session with Scott Sanchez. But coming up next week, we will be kicking off October, which will focus on embracing change for the next normal, with Tom Smith just checking in on the economy, and he's going to especially take a look at the sports lens and the impact of the economy on sports. So stay tuned for that. Some of our other topics, upcoming topics listed there as well. Of course, our typical social media channels, if you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening, including Business Over Breakfast. If you are looking for a link to any of our past sessions or today's session, you will find it on our Emory Executive Education LinkedIn page there. And it will also be provided in the chat. Also, if you liked what you learned and you want to keep learning and expanding your skill set, we've got a number of great courses coming up, including Tom Smith, who's joining us next week. He is running our personal financial fitness workshop. Starts on October 2nd. So if you're interested in kind of setting some financial goals, and kind of being more thoughtful about how you're approaching your finances, be sure to sign up today for that. We also have our Crafting and Influence workshop, executive communication and leadership, as well as some great programs, executive coaching, negotiations, and leading and change. So a lot of really relevant topics coming up. So you'll find a link in the chat to our short courses and workshops if you are interested in learning more. So to that end, I will leave this up here and just pass it back over to Scott for any closing remarks. And thank you again, Scott, for all the great insights today.
Thank you, Sarah. Awesome. Maybe 2 things I would just say. 1, thank you. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for the engagement. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. Thank you for asking them without a doubt. But here's maybe the last thought I will leave you with is there's a lot, as you think about driving innovation in a company or any organization, there's a lot outside of your control. There's some inside your control, right? Without a doubt. And, lots of questions around what about in this organization or this type of organization or this type of industry, or how do I convince leadership and how do I create the ROI of innovation, all that is good. What you can control completely though is you, right? And that's what I would encourage you to think about. No doubt, there's all kinds of methodologies out there. There's all kinds of buzzwords. There's all kinds of those things. What I believe is that the core of innovation is this collaborative, empathetic, need-finding, creative prototyping. So regardless of what methodology you use or what you're able to do or not able to do at work, what you can control is you and your skills. And that's really what I would encourage you to try with these experiments, and keep making yourself an innovator. The best innovators are made, not born. And great luck to all of you.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks again. And for those of you who are with us for the next minute or so, we'd appreciate you just filling out our poll to give us some feedback on today's session. So thanks so much. And we hope to see you next week on October 1st with Economy and Me.
Thanks all.